So when I first started cooking, I would follow recipe steps and wonder why I was doing them. Like why saute the onions first, or why need a seitan dough? And since making seitan takes more time, effort, and money than say making a salad, it is understandably intimidating. So to remedy this, let's walk through the almost universal steps of seitan making, which are pick a great recipe, prepare the dough, cook it, and the final prep. So first things first, we gotta pick a great recipe.
All right, so when you're perusing the web, you want to ask yourself questions while you skim the recipe, like, do you have time for this? Are you up for the challenge that this recipe has, or are you really in the mood for something maybe easier? So with that said, let's find a recipe we can use for this video. Oh, hey, this one looks pretty good. It looks like it will take about 15 minutes of active time and a full-on cook for 1 hour with resting overnight. And that dude looks really familiar. Anyway, this all looks good, so let's try this out and use it to make a chicken pot pie. So now that we've picked our recipe, let's break down all the different types of ingredients that seitan recipes use.
So first up is vital wheat gluten. This is just dried condensed gluten, just waiting to be activated by hydration. Now inside each seitan roast are seasonings like herbs and spices, salt, and sauces. And this could have been in its own section, but I'm including fats here too, like oil. I like to mix my dry seasonings with my dry gluten and wet seasonings with my hydration, which brings me to another key piece. Hydration. Many recipes call for water or stock, but here you might also get more flavor by adding wet seasonings to the hydration with things like Worcestershire sauce, vinegar, and soy sauce. And our chicken recipe doesn't call for changing the color, but typically this is where you would add things like browning liquid, which brings me to my final ingredient type, structural and functional ingredients. I'm kind of lumping everything else in here, but this is where you would add ingredients that will further alter your texture, usually without changing the final flavor too much. The most common examples of this are tofu, which you blend in, and chickpea flour. Occasionally this could be more boutique-y stuff like soy protein, pea protein, methyl cellulose, and others. Don't worry about this right now though, that is a whole other video. So let's apply this to our chicken recipe. We've of course got our vital wheat gluten, and for our seasonings we'll use MSG, poultry seasoning, onion powder, garlic powder, and apple cider vinegar. For the hydration we'll use veggie stock, and as far as functional or structural ingredients go, we have instant potato flakes that will change the texture and structure. Let's move on to the next steps of almost every recipe, preparing the dough. To make a dough, you combine your hydration with your dry mix and stir until you get a cohesive dough. This activates the gluten, causing it to begin to form tiny bonds. Before we shape and cook, typically you need to develop those strands to the desired texture. This means kneading, braiding, knotting, bringing in equipment like food processors, or a combination of any of these. The goal of all of this is to create a more complex texture in the final product. A more succulent recipe might not call for any gluten manipulation at all, going straight to the cooking process. Next, we set the final shape. If you are making a roast, sausage, or a similar log shape, you'd form it into a log. Depending on the cooking method, you'll many times take that log and wrap it in foil by placing it at the bottom of a long sheet and rolling like a Tootsie Roll, and then crimping next to the log and twisting in from the ends. Check out my pepperoni video for more info on this method. For making cutlets, nuggets, balls, or pieces, etc., you cut or tear those off before cooking. You might also wrap the seitan like my ribs video around sugarcane or a food-safe wood. If you need to stretch the dough into a sheet and your gluten snaps back or won't shape properly, let it sit for 30 minutes to an hour to see if that will make it more compliant. Letting your gluten rest for a few hours, in general, will almost never mess it up, and many times this could be a good thing, further allowing the gluten to develop. Now let's prepare our shredded chicken dough. We'll make this dough by mixing our wet with our dry ingredients and using our hands to make a cohesive dough. Then agitate the gluten so it will shred better by kneading it for a few minutes and then braid. Okay, now this is ready for the cook, but before we do that, let's talk about the most common ways you cook seitan. And let's start with the most common one, which is baking. And while we're over here at the oven, don't be afraid to use this as a slow cooker of sorts. Set everything to a Dutch oven and look online for temperatures and times you have to cook to match a slow cooker. This is sometimes used as an alternative to the next method, which is simmering. While simmering is pretty straightforward, you really do need to be around to keep an eye on the simmer stock so that it does not boil. Your seitan will turn spongy if you allow rapid boiling. A great temp to shoot for is between 210F, 98C for the simmer stock, and this is what a good simmer looks like. Next we have steaming, which admittedly I have the least amount of experience with, but my only tip here is to make sure that you leave enough space between the steaming liquid and the seitan so it doesn't turn spongy. If you have other tips and tricks about steaming out there, feel free to drop those in the comments below. Pressure cooking is another great method as well. Just use an insert and make sure the water isn't touching the roast. And when you shape it, think ahead to make sure it will actually fit in your cooker. Many recipes call for a combination of these methods. A common one that I use a lot is baking and then simmering. I do that so the gluten sets its shape during the bake and so it doesn't turn into a giant blob when it cooks during the simmer. Fry, simmer, fry is another popular method. Similar to the bake-simmer combo, we do that so the shape sets before the cook. All right, so back to our original chicken recipe. Let's use the fry, simmer, fry technique. So to a generously oiled pan, let's get the sides browned up and then simmer in some chickenless broth. So while we let that cook, let's talk about the step that is the most ignored, and that is the final prep. In most recipes, you let the seitan rest overnight, allowing the texture to improve. Now you can treat your seitan like you would meat. I won't go into all of it, but you can sear, saute, smoke, glaze, marinade, anything you'd like to do. But please, please don't forget to season. And once you're done eating, you can store either in the fridge or the freezer. In the fridge, it will keep for a week or so, but it will store indefinitely in the freezer. Now that we're done with cooking our chicken, let's do the final prep, which is for us making a chicken pot pie. For this, we'll shred it up so it absorbs the gravy, add a pie crust dough, bake, and then eat. By the way, if you want the shredded chicken recipe or the chicken pot pie recipe, I put them on your screen now so you can check those out. And you know, this wasn't an exhaustive list of different ways you can cook or elements of making seitan. So if you agree or disagree, I would really love to hear about it in the comments. I'm sure I missed a couple things. And as always, y'all, be nice to each other and keep cooking.